been enjoying this conversation. That follow button right this second. We do this 7 nights a week. Give you a lot of content here, either on Twitch or on YouTube. So hit that follow button and make sure notifications are on so you know I'm going live. Exclamation for social and chat. For our social media, we got a lot of it. We got Twitter. We got where we tweet and let you know when things are happening. We got Discord. Everything happens in our Discord. Come and be a part of our Discord community. We'd love to have you. YouTube's where I find the bots. If you missed anything, missed any of this fun stuff, right? Go to our YouTube, like, comment, subscribe, consider becoming a YouTube member, hitting that join button, supporting the channel that way to continue getting that content 7 nights a week. Also, you can subscribe to this channel, subscribe to this, to the Twitch thing, right? That won't cost money, $5, only $5, but it helps us a lot. It allows me to keep doing all this for you. Okay, moving on. All right, so the second topic is sex work is a hot button topic. We discuss it frequently here on Twitch, but it also has its place in discourse outside of the online space. A thing less talked about is the fact that sex workers have relationships, often monogamous ones, outside of their line of work. So, if sexual engagement with someone outside of your partner is considered infidelity under normal circumstances, does doing sex work change the way the act should be viewed? If so, how? Okay, so here we go. We'll start with Stardust.
Sorry. Can you come back to me in just a second?
Sure, no problem. Cool.
Yeah, sorry.
Socialist? Cyrus?
It seems kind of like inconsistent to me to view sex as like inherently different just because like the person engaging in it is doing something a bit different with it. But it's also a bit odd to me for like a partner to come in and try and control let's say like the way that a person uses their body to do work, including sex work. And so it would ultimately just kind of, I don't know, it seems like so personal, something that would have to be communicated between the couple, and people need to be more open-minded in general, less afraid of sex work, more knowledgeable about it. It's so hard for me to come in and like say, well, your relationship should be this way, you should view it this way, yeah, I'm not super sure what to say on this one.
Okay, great. Erudite, please.
Yeah, I think infidelity should be like fully and wholly determined by the couple itself. I think if you're an individual who would feel that sex work is cheating, probably don't date somebody who does sex work. That would probably not be a good combo. I think the trickiest part comes in for a monogamous relationship where one partner, after they've been dating for a while or married for a while, suddenly decides that they want to do sex work. And if the other partner felt that it could be infidelity, that would be a really difficult thing. I don't know, the way I manage my relationship is very much like what we each feel is infidelity is kind of the rules we work off of, because fundamentally my partner in a monogamous relationship, my partner is the main one that I'm trying to respect. So yeah, I think that's kind of the end all be all of it. I try not to comment too much on what is infidelity unless a partner themselves says that it is.
Sonia, please.
So far, I'm in agreement with Cyrus and Erudite that it's very much, it depends on the couples, and what is infidelity is so variable depending on from person to person and from relationship to relationship. I think from just like an abstracted view, I would see it as it feels a little kind of weird to tie sex work to being somehow infidelity when they've got a monogamous relationship. That doesn't make a lot of sense to me, at least looking at it from the outside. So I would by default lean toward, no, that doesn't make any sense to me. One is a job and the other one is your intimate partner, right? So I don't see why the sex work would somehow be considered infidelity. But again, you go back to each person and each individual partnership, the definition of infidelity can mean something vastly different. So I agree.
Kaylee?
Yeah. Kind of in agreement with everybody. I think it's very situational. I have been in the situation where I was in a monogamous relationship and I was doing sex work, and I would say a lot of the problems that were based around it were based around other issues. It just kind of like like if we had a communication problem, like we had an overall communication problem, that might have also been an issue with the sex work as well. But yeah, I'm kind of in agreement with everybody. It's completely situational, and that's up to the couple to decide if it'll hinder their relationship at all, or if they want to do that. So
I think it really depends on the type of sex work as well, right? Because a lot of the times today, like when somebody says I'm a sex worker, it's not what it used to be, where it's like somebody would like go out and sleep with somebody, right? Or do like a sexual act with somebody. Nowadays, like if you take pictures and put them on OnlyFans, you're also considered a sex worker. And I don't know if that also covers people who just post like Instagram-esque kind of pictures on their OnlyFans as well. I'm assuming if you're just posting the equivalent of like what a lot of girls post on Instagram on your OnlyFans, probably like I don't know if your partner would feel weird about it. I guess that would be up to you and your partner. I guess that's really like the main thing for me, I guess, is like I would ask, like, do you consider it cheating if your partner looks at somebody else's Instagram page and like likes a picture of them in a bikini? Would that set you off, right? Would you be offended if your partner had a subscription to somebody's OnlyFans? Would that set you off? Things like that. I think these are interesting questions. So
yeah. How do we feel about people who would say that if they were monogamous and their partner engaged in sex work, that it would be cheating? Maybe that's, since it seems like we all agree that like cheating is between a couple. How do we feel about couples who maybe would say that is cheating?
Which one is cheating?
How do we feel about couples who feel one partner might decide that they do feel that sex work is cheating throughout the relationship, whether the sex work began before or after? We can parse that out too, I suppose.
I feel like that's something that you would have to really have a solid discussion with your partner about, because it's I know people who have gotten into relationships thinking that they would be okay with their partner being with other people, like say, it was an open relationship, but only one was being monogamous and the other one had other partners. I know people who thought that they could commit to that, and then later on it turned into a disaster for their relationship and became very contentious because the person who entered into it wasn't able to. They thought that they could deal with it, and then they couldn't.
Mm-hmm.
So I could totally see that being a scenario, and I think that's where people need to really communicate a lot more and talk to each other and be very open and honest, not just with their partners but also with themselves.
Yeah. I definitely second that. I kind of had the opposite issue in my relationship, where my ex loved the money that we were getting from it, and it was actually really difficult to tell him that I didn't want to do it anymore. And for a long time I told myself, like, oh, I love doing this makes me a lot of money. And then when I ended up telling him, I ended up bawling my eyes out, because I was like, wait, I really don't want to do this anymore. And it was really hard to tell him. And it wasn't like we weren't going to be able to, like, we weren't going broke, I could stop if I needed to. And so I totally agree. And that's really difficult. Like if, like Erudite's question, if somebody, let's say they started doing sex work, and then all of a sudden the other partner is uncomfortable with it. I think the only thing you can do is discuss that with your partner. And like at the end of the day, like if it's not something you guys can work out, then it's just like any other issue. If you can't work it out, it's probably not meant to be. But
you guys, sorry.
Oh, go ahead.
Do you guys think that, like, if your partner had a subscription to somebody else's OnlyFans, would you feel some sort of way about it?
Sorry, say it again.
If your partner had a subscription to somebody's OnlyFans, would you feel weird about it?
So one thing that made me very uncomfortable, I was on the other end of this, was my my ex decided he wanted to tell all his friends that I was doing this, and they ended up finding my account, and they looked at it and they saw everything, and it made me extremely uncomfortable. I wish that was something that we would talk about beforehand. That was one of the issues that we had. And honestly, I think if I were on the other end of it, I think that's still just so situational. Like if I think that if they did it like without having that kind of foundation, that that's okay. Like if you're in a relationship where like your let's just say your girlfriend is really uncomfortable with you watching porn, and you go and watch porn, like, yeah, maybe that's not a big deal to you, but obviously it's a big deal to her, and you just have to like work through that and compromise, I guess. Yeah.
I don't know what it is, but if it were porn, if I had a partner who's looking at porn, I probably wouldn't care. But like somebody being subscribed to somebody's OnlyFans feels much more personal.
You mean
Yeah,
OnlyFans of someone you know, right? Like, for instance, if it was your best friend and they subscribed to their OnlyFans, would that be something different if you know your partner was getting off to them being naked?
I know for myself, I have like so I don't have a super big like sexual insecurity. Like, I think I'm like hot and pretty good at sex. Like, I feel pretty comfortable with that. So the idea of like him being even the idea of like my husband like making out with somebody else doesn't make me feel too uncomfortable, but I'm really insecure that emotionally he'll find somebody who is like way less volatile, way less like work emotionally. Like, I have this big self-loathing thing of like, fuck, cool, I'm cute, but what if I'm just a lot, and like, what if I'm too much too? And like, what if he could find a girl who's just like nicer, and like overall easier to live with? And I know like it seems weird, like with the OnlyFans, like I don't know how I'd feel about it. I think if it was a friend of mine, I'd be more uncomfortable, because for me, the like biggest fear for me is being replaced at like a social and emotional level, because I think like my personality isn't enough is like my biggest concern. So that's for sure like personal, just and unique to me, which is interesting, right? Because I think a lot of people in the reverse, if they said like, if my partner wasn't okay with me being like sexually open with men and he was just insecure about it, that wouldn't be okay. But like my husband's really, really sensitive to the fact that like I'm insecure about these things, and like goes the extra mile because he like loves me, even though it's like kind of unfair. Like it is unfair for me to ask, because he like doesn't give a fuck if I even like he's like, you could flirt with other men. Like I don't give a shit. Like I'm very confident like that I'm like quality, and like at the end of the day, if you leave me, that's your fucking problem, not mine. Like I probably just dodged a bullet. So I recognize that there's that imbalance in my relationship. And I think like if you love somebody enough, those imbalances can be workable. I just have a lot of like gratitude for him also as a result. I
think that there is a lot that can, like with OnlyFans, like there's some women on there that like are not very personable. Like you strictly just, you pay, you see the pictures, maybe you can message them if you want like further content. And then there's some OnlyFans people that are very, very personable. You're chatting, it's like a girlfriend experience. And I think it totally depends, for me at least, on the relationship you're having with that OnlyFans girl. If you just find her extremely hot and you want to pay $5 a month to look at her, that doesn't bother me. I could care less. If you're paying her a bunch of extra money, possibly our money that we use to do things together, and you're helping her out and essentially a second girlfriend, that's something we need to talk about. I think that it's just there's just so many different ways that this could go, but the general idea is like, again, it's just communication is so important.
Yeah, personally, like there's such personally just like such a big difference for me between like I'm sex with my husband because like I had emotional attachment to him, and then like doing it for something like work. That to me is a very firm boundary that's very easy for me to connect in my head. Do a natural version to the idea that somebody would try to control how I use my body to work. Again, even if it was sex work. But yeah, the emotional thing with OnlyFans, that could get.
You're breaking up a little bit.
Your data rate
I wasn't
really
sure if that
dropped.
was just me.
Yeah.
Something I. Oh.
I'm not sure if something you may be opened. If not, then I can maybe change the region. What region? Where are you closer to? The East Coast, West Coast.
Yeah.
East Coast.
West Coast.
West Coast. All right, I'll change it to
West.
Yeah, West. Yeah, I'll change it to West Coast. Give me one moment. Save changes. Okay. So try it again. No, repeat the last thing you were saying, please.
Just in regards to like having a partner subscribe to OnlyFans, that alone wouldn't bother me. But like what Kaylee was saying, if I found out they were like sending private messages to this person, or finding ways to like video chat with them and stuff, I would start to get a little nervous.
I know from my perspective, I would like fully encourage it, because then I wouldn't have to deal with them. And I've been in that situation actually. I dated a guy back in the late 90s, and I was like fully encouraging him to do stuff with other people. He wanted an open relationship, and I was totally okay with it because then I didn't have to have sex with him, and I didn't have to be too involved. But I come from a very, very, very different perspective, being very asexual and very aromantic, and so I enjoyed the just kind of closeness of having a relationship with them at the time. Enjoyed spending time with them and just having private time with him, being a little more intimate with movies and stuff like that. That was okay, but I really didn't want the sex, and and he was rather voracious, so I was totally okay with him even bringing people over and having sex with them even in the house. So I'm very easygoing about it and very encouraging of it.
Yeah, I think what's really important in all this, like as I'm like listening to kind of everyone's different thing, is like you really have to know like what works for you. And I feel like in this day and age, it feels like there's sometimes like pressure to be more okay with things than you are, especially because I think like at the end of the day, like the reality is like if I didn't have the insecurities I had, I also wouldn't really give that much of a fuck. Like that's the reality. I'd want to stay monogamous just because like I prefer monogamy personally. But like the idea of like because I don't view flirting as like cheating necessarily, because it's really fun to flirt, right? I view like certain things as cheating, right? Like sex and like forming an actual relationship. And I know that like if I wasn't insecure, I would be just as okay with my husband flirting with people as he is with me, right? But it's not cool for me to like say that, right? Like not that anyone's like shamed me here, but like it feels like when you're getting into new dating relationships especially, it can be really tricky to like outline what your boundaries are, because there's kind of this pressure to be like kind of okay with everything. Because I think like being okay with everything is like some level of marker of like, yeah, I'm a pretty like solid, secure, good on my own kind of person. But the reality is like most people are not as like tough as Anya, which is like cool. But yeah, I just wish that we could like have more open conversations with like future, like not that I'm dating or anything right now, but like, if I ever ended up dating again, like it would be this tricky thing of like, I wish we could just have an open conversation about what the boundaries are, and there wouldn't be this like social pressure for me to be like, yeah, I'm cool with things that I know that I'm not necessarily comfortable with.
Mm-hmm. I totally agree with that, and the pressure too of like even I've seen it on here. If someone sounds a little inexperienced with sex, the comments are just vanilla, 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 and it's or if you say you don't like some sort of like BDSM thing, it's all just like vanilla, and there's pressure of that in relationships as well. And I guess where I was going with this is there's. Oh no, I lost it. I'm so sorry. It's like just talking about the relationship.
So I think it's what you just said was actually really interesting, Erudite. I keep saying that. I think it was really interesting. When you talked about being uncomfortable and the burden of it all, right? And you previously brought up porn specifically, right? Like we were previously talking about porn, and like what happens if your partner is uncomfortable with porn, and talked about like having to compromise, right? I think that's really interesting in the era of like only some left, like sex positivity, right? That we should be like free and open with these things, right? That porn is no big deal, and we shouldn't shame sex workers, right? Anything like that, or sex workers or sex work. And so in that environment, especially if you're talking about people on the left, if your partner happens to be uncomfortable with porn, like whose problem is it? Is it like if it was my girlfriend, which I don't have one, someone could change that. Is it is it
This is
her
why he
problem?
does the Amazon Lily.
This is why I do the Amazon Lily. Is it her problem for being uncomfortable, or is it like my problem, and I should like limit my habit, but like limit my the things that I view, right, for her. Is that fair to me? Is that fair to her to expect her to deal with it? What do you all think?
I genuinely wish I knew.
I
For
think
like
it
an
depends.
objective thing, I really have
Yeah.
no idea. It's
I-
something that you have to work out between you, and there's nothing like right or wrong either way, it seems.
Well,
We're really big on like the whole 50-50 kind of thing, like this big tit for tat. And I think any relationship is inherently going to be tit for tat in some way. But it seems like we get really fixated on like when we say tit for tat, it means like it has to be fair and it has to be equal. But the reality is like as long as both partners' needs are being met, you can also compromise right on things. So like Prime, if like your big thing was like, I fucking love porn, like it's my thing, it's my hobby, and I'm not giving that up, and that's an uncompromisable for me, then like, yeah, I think that you get to have your boundaries and like rules about whatever. And I think like when we moralize these things too much, we get into like really tricky water, right? Like I used to be uncomfortable with my partner even looking at like porn, and it was wholly rooted to like my like kind of eating disordered and like dysphoric kind of thinking about my body. And as that vastly improved, I was like, yeah, I don't give a fuck anymore, like at all. And so it's like, it's both of our responsibility, but it's our responsibility to decide if we're okay with it, right? Like my boyfriend at the time could have decided like, I'm not really okay with that, right? And for me, it was just basically like, I never wanted to see it. I never wanted to hear about it. And ideally, if it could be reduced, that would be really great, right? But I didn't even feel comfortable asking him to reduce. I just was like, I really don't ever want to hear, see, or like find it on your computer ever. Like, because I would see a girl and I'd be like, well, I don't look like her, right? Which is my problem, right? And so on me, he was willing to compromise that. I'm super, super, super lucky for that. But I also have to have the amount of warranted gratitude of my partner compromising on something for mostly my benefit, which is to make me feel comfortable, right? So it's like, I think there's no right or wrong. We just can't moralize these things. And if he's like happy with being like, as long as like you're willing to like have sex with me, then, cool. I don't need to watch as much porn. Cool. That works for a couple maybe.
I feel like no matter what, relationships always have an imbalance in terms of compromise. There's always someone who's compromising far more than the other person. And sometimes that can vary from thing that they compromise to thing that they compromise to. But overall, I think that there's always somebody compromising far more than the other. Like I know in my situation, I was always the more agreeable one in dating. And so I would be the one kind of making all the the majority of the compromising. And I know that with at least in the minimal amount of experience that I had dating someone who is into porn, like the porn was not gonna go. Like if I know that even if I was bothered by it, which I wasn't, I just didn't want to see it because I just didn't like the porn. It doesn't. It's not something I understand and I don't want to see it. But he told me at one point that he was going to just stop porn just to be nicer to me because he knew that I didn't like porn. I didn't actually care if he was consuming porn. I just didn't want to see it because I didn't like it. And he just couldn't stop. And it's like, it seems to me like if somebody's really into porn, they're probably not really going to be compromising on that, even if they say that they are. So I feel like that's something that you really have to kind of work out. You really have to be either understanding of and allow it to happen, but with conditions, or that's not the right relationship for you. But I don't know. I could be wrong. I have a very small sample size of one. So, but this is kind of what I've also heard other people say, other people talking about that. Like I've been trying to kick porn and I just can't do it. Or my boyfriend's been trying to kick porn and he's clearly not, because I'm finding it on the computer again. So it sounds to me like that's a common thing. So you put those together, that if somebody's really into porn, it's unlikely that they're going to actually be able to kick it if that's the compromise in the relationship. And then you add to that there's always somebody compromising more than the other person in a relationship. I feel like you basically need to decide that no, this isn't going to work for that type of thing, right? So, or you're going to be the one compromising more. It's kind of where my thought process is going.
Yeah, I've had a very similar experience where he so there was a situation. He like sent some pictures back and forth with a girl on Snapchat. I found out he went on a whole spiral. I was actually pretty relaxed about it. It didn't really sink in yet. I was like pretty chill, and he comes to me like crying, and he's like, I just unfollowed like 300 girls on Instagram. And I was like, first of all, if you had 300, okay. And anyways, thanks, I guess. Like, whatever. And then and then a few months later, he really cheats on me. And I'm like, okay, well, like, if that's part of your nature, then that's just kind of how it's going to be. Like, it's one of the reasons why I know that I can't really be in a monogamous relationship. It can be like pretty monogamous, pretty like, you know, having a main person, but I know that I have it in me where like I still like to experience things with other people, and I still like to make connections with other people, and like I've had to learn that through like in a relationship where like we're cheating on each other. And it's I just think, yeah, like it's just super important to know that, like, especially if someone is like overcompensating, like you said, like with the porn, of being like, oh, I'm gonna stop it, and you're like, okay, well, I didn't need all that. It's like, okay, now that seems like a you issue that you're like trying to suppress.
So, and I'm not saying I have the answer to this. I definitely don't. I'm just really exploring this topic, because I think it's, you know, really fascinating. If we want to build a society where we say that on the left, if you're on the left, if we build a society where we're all more open to the idea of sex work, to have a more sex positive place where we attach no shame to it, right? It feels like when it comes to this subject, porn, that if you are telling someone to stop specifically because it makes you uncomfortable, not because like your other partner like has a problem, because they might have a problem, I don't know, maybe they have a problem, but if you're telling them specifically to stop, then it sounds to me, it would sound to my ears, if I was hearing that from someone else, that like you have a lot of shame within your life about sex, or you want to shame me about how I view sex, and then that would be an issue. But there is something just to say about like incompatibility, right? Well, if this is really that big of a thing, then maybe you guys should split apart, right? If it's like that big of a deal. I think what Erudite was saying before, right? If it's like a hard line, but do we want to change that, right? Do we want to say that people shouldn't have a problem with these things, right? This uncomfortability about nude bodies, right? Or your friend's a nude body, as we were talking about previously before on the OnlyFans thing that Stardust brought up, right? Like, do we want a world where like this is like not a big deal, or is it okay for people to have red lines, even if they might be unreasonable, right? Like,
I think it's really important to know why your red line exists, right? Like, I grew up a fundy Christian. So my red line used to be like porn of any form, because I was a fundy Christian, which is why lots of Christians have a rough time when they start having sex, because they find out that porn's pretty ubiquitous. Right? And so like, if you have a red line about something, I don't want to shame people. Like, I think people are on different journeys, right? So like, I still have friends that are much, much more Christian and conservative than I am still. And they still have red lines about things that like, I just really don't. And a lot of their reasons are connected for them specifically back to like either trauma or religious beliefs. And it's like, I don't know, you get to have the lines that you want to have. Just be aware that like when you have really high asks, and if people meet that ask that's really high, you should be grateful, like really grateful. And I wish we had a lot more gratitude for like partners that were willing to compromise, right? Like, I don't know. I'm always simping for Zanya, so I'm just gonna keep simping for Zanya as I continue, right? But I'm like, I hope your partners have like a lot of gratitude for like how chill you are and how much you're just like, I just want you to be happy and I want to be happy too. Like that's amazing. And it seems like your asks are so low, right? Like my husband compromises on probably more than I do because I'm a bit of like an anal, like I'm really anal, like I'm really intense. So he compromises more, but he's just chill. He compromises because he doesn't give a fuck. Like he doesn't care either way. But I'm so grateful to him too, right? And so I think like you get to have a red line. I don't want to moralize it and tell people like you're wrong to have a porn red line because they might have a reason for it, right? Like one of my friends' reason for it is that like she grew up homeless and a foster care kid, and she actually got like abused by creating porn for somebody that like she doesn't want out there. So like when she sees porn, any amateur porn, it really upsets her, right? It's connected to trauma. So it's like I'm not going to tell her she's wrong to have that. It's probably worth exploring. But when you have that much trauma, to be honest, like your porn aversion is usually not the PTSD symptom that you're going to be targeting anyways, right? So I don't know. I think you get to have like whatever line you want. Just like have gratitude when you know that it's a tough ask and people are willing to meet it. And don't get butt mad when people are like, yeah, that doesn't work for me.
Yeah, I think like a lot of people have like psychological issues with this. Like it sounded like body dysmorphia going on in your case, right? Like and even if you could acknowledge that, right, intellectually, that doesn't mean that you're ready to take that step to have that activated by somebody watching porn. You can track that in your head and say, hey, maybe this is like a little bit unreasonable, but I can't.
Hi, your
You're
robot is
still
really bad again.
yeah, you're
and you just have to draw that down.
Yeah, Cyrus.
Not again.
Yeah, I don't know.
Is your partner downloading something?
No,
is it OnlyFans?
I was gonna say it's downloading like that you have way too many OnlyFans open.
Yeah.
Let me go through. Maybe it's just like a Google tab thing.
So work on that. But we did hear most of what you had to say. But I guess I want to focus on the sex positivity thing because this is kind of the heart of the original question, right? It's so Katie was the one who came up with this question. But looking at it as how it's phrased, right? It's phrased in a way that I think a lot of people will look at it, and that it centers monogamy. It centers that as like the default, right? And that if you're straying from that, like let's look at it through the lens of cheating, rather than through the lens that I think you guys were ended up landing on, is that like, well, you're forming some sort of open relationship, assuming both partners are into it, right? Whatever you're forming isn't monogamy, right? I don't think so, at least like by the definition, it's not monogamy, but that's okay. But this idea of sex positivity and whether that's a good thing. I have a friend, her name is Jo, and she has big critiques on the idea of sex positivity, right? People call her like sex negative, but that's like not what she is. Like she's just like not on the sex positivity train because I guess she feels that it ends up excusing a lot of abuse, right? Excusing abuse, for instance, in the porn industry, that like happens, like what one of you was pointing out, that like people do get abused there, right? But since leftists are in such a rush to say sex work is work and should be treated just like anything else, that we end up brushing that aside, right? Saying that that's like those anti-porn crusaders we all remember. But have we gone too far with this idea of sex positivity? Is this an unqualified good in the world to be more quote unquote sex positive, TM? Or the other thing, or the other way around? I don't know.
I think that this is actually one of my more controversial takes that I have, is that I think that this blanket statement of like sex positivity and supporting all workers, it can be harmful, right? Because the vast majority of sex workers, I believe, like globally, are not would not choose to be in that, right? And a lot of sex workers globally are put into it underage, right? Are coerced into it underage. So we have a very like first world way of thinking of sex work. And even in the first world, a lot of sex workers are exposed to a lot of abuse and a lot of coercion. And it's a very hard job. And I don't like that when I say, like, you know, you're being exploited for your body. The automatic response that people say to me is like, well, a lot of jobs exploit you for your body. But sex work is different. There is something different there. And if there are people who can engage in sex work in a healthy way and have a healthy relationship with it, I have no problem with that. But as sex work is right now, as it exists in the world right now, it is not that way. It's not that way, and we have to, like, at least acknowledge that much, right?
And there's also, like, another thing that Joe also talks about is the social pressure around it, like the peer pressure around sex positivity. It's something that's very broadcast these days. Like, yeah, you know, sex positivity. It's, you know, it's a big.
You sound
thing.
a little low to me. I'm sorry, Zonia. Am I the only one? Like,
I've had to turn her up to 200%.
Yeah, Zonia.
Oh.
Yeah.
Hang on, let me check on it real quick.
It did get a little bit worse before, yeah.
Yeah, before it was a bit more manageable.
Yeah,
but,
I think sex positivity without any
Yeah, it
level of, like,
drops.
There you go.
Yeah, so there's been a lot of this is something else Joe has also talked about, which is the social pressure around sex positivity, where there's this sort of trend in culture these days, especially online, but even outside of online, to be sex positive, and that if you're not sex positive, that you're kind of like contributing to sex negativity and like and heteronormative, you know, like cultural standards and patriarchal standards and such. And so this creates sort of a social pressure that a lot of people will cave to and kind of convince themselves or try to be sex positive, and then find themselves in more of a compromising situation that they're uncomfortable with in, like, a relationship or something else. And so that's another thing that should also be called out about it. Like, I think it's cool if someone is sex positive, that's great. But this peer pressure and social pressure for everybody to be sex positive can get out of hand and can push people in directions that they are uncomfortable with. And if they voice that discomfort that they have, they will either be afraid to voice it, or they will be kind of shunned for it or shamed for it.
Yeah, I think, like, sex positivity with no scruples obviously isn't wise. I don't know. I'm not as versed on sex positivity as, like, Joe. So, like, my understanding of sex positivity like, the critiques that Joe's levied doesn't. But I know that you're paraphrasing Joe, so I don't want to be like, oh, Joe's arguments make no sense, because she's obviously not here to argue them. I'm having a hard time integrating them, because I'm like, oh, interesting. Okay, when my understanding of sex positivity is that, like, obviously, like, there's a level of critical analysis, but maybe that's because I've just been exposed to, like, people like Lilac Doll and individuals who are, like, really well thought when they're talking about sex positivity, so they're really nuanced in how they're talking about it, right? But, like, yeah, obviously, like, sex positivity that puts pressure on people to, like, be more comfortable with sexuality than they are wouldn't be good. But I imagine, like, I would hope, and I don't know, I'm not, like, in the sex work world either at all, so, like, I don't have a hard time commenting on, like, does it practically play out that, like, people do feel pressured to, like, be more sexually open, to, like, try more stuff. The financial stuff might create, like, this weird dichotomy, right, where you're feeling pressured to do, like, more kinky stuff than maybe you're even comfortable with, because there's financial incentives to do that, right? And, like, that probably wouldn't, in my mind, fall under sex positivity necessarily, but yeah, I think sex positivity with, like, no critical analysis is going to be a problem, but any major ideology and movement with no critical analysis is irresponsible. So I would that's my unnuanced position, I guess, on it.
And one thing I would say is that like one point also that people like to bring up when I talk about this and talk about, like, sex work in general, is that they don't like it when I bring, like, non-consensual or coerced sex work or like they think that I shouldn't be considering that sex work. But a lot of sex work is not just non-consensual. A lot of it is coerced, and a lot of people get coerced into it and then consent to continuing in that industry, right? So to be make this distinction between consensual sex work and, like, sex trafficking, it's not that black and white. There's a lot of gray area. A lot of people get coerced into it. A lot of people end up continuing in it because that's what they know, or that's or they become comfortable in it. But that doesn't mean that there aren't like, you know, issues in that still, right? Just because you become a consensual at some point doesn't mean that there are issues in the way that you were introduced to that, right? Or if you were introduced to that as a young person, right? So I'm not willing to write off such a high percentage of sex workers in the world just because other people don't consider them sex workers. I think if it's trafficking, it's sex work, but it's just forced sex work. So but I mean, that's just like my perspective on it.
So maybe I missed it. It's a possibility. Or was someone else gonna go? I'll wait.
Yeah, sorry, I had to unmute myself again. I do worry. I think it's like a really good acknowledgement to make that these things often tie together with one another, and they often feed into one another. Like, I think people that go into sex work because they need the money, I think there's an element of coercion there even. And all of that needs to be talked about, but I don't really feel comfortable using the same term.
Yeah.
Like, do you kind of see?
You know, I see what you're saying. I didn't want to limit this just to sex work, because I've had the discussion that you're leading to, Cyrus. I've had this discussion. I mean, we can have it again, it's no problem. But like, it's going to lead into like what is actually coercion, right? And isn't all work coercive in capitalism?
Oh,
And
yeah. I don't really want to go that. I'm kind of stuck on the terminology, because the way that Stardust was phrasing things kind of sounded like she does want people to use these terms together most of the time.
Or at least consider it, because it's a huge gray area. It is not black and white like people say it is.
Yeah, people are too simplistic. I agree.
But yeah, so yeah, I hear you on that. But like, the reason why we brought sex positivity in first place was in the context of relationships, right? So there's a larger leftist critique about sex work. But then on the smaller micro level is how these things interact with each other in our daily lives and in our relationships, if we have one, and I don't. And again, someone can fix that. But like, this is where that's where the rubber meets the road. So like, I think it comes in the form, I think Erudite was touching on this, maybe someone else, that like forcing or pressuring people to get into to do acts that they're not comfortable with, right? And say, well, like, we're being sex positive here, right? Like, why are you having so much shame around this, right? And it may not come out in those words, but it comes from this mindset, right? This thought process that we've been building here. If I'm a good leftist, sometimes like when I hear leftist rhetoric, because I want to be a good leftist, like I change like how I act, right? And sometimes I do so uncritically, and I'm like, I don't want to be hurtful to anyone, right? And I just want to be a good person, right? And I think generally leftist thought makes for a world where less people are hurt, where less harm is done. And so I adjust myself. And I think a lot of times it's for the better, but sometimes it actually might be for the worse. Sometimes I need to maybe take a step back and think, do I actually agree with this, right? And how does this reflect on my life personally? So going back to the sex positivity, I feel that this could be, you know what this reminds me of? I'm just gonna sidetrack. The 70s, right? The flower child movement, where people like left their homes for like communes and stuff, right? And they were gonna say, we're gonna create a new world, right? And in that world, it's gonna be a lot of sex positivity, basically. They didn't use those words, but that's what they were using. And in those like spaces, they found that actually sexism by these like supposedly like leftist type of men, like sexism was reinforced. Their gender roles were reinforced. And in fact, a lot of sexual abuse happened there, right? Because hey, you should be free of your body. So I'm wondering if we're like repeating the same things.
Yeah, I think any ideology particularly like an aggressive like positivity ideology, like gets into the weird paradox of like inclusivity, right? Where you're like, you become so inclusive that you're exclusive, right? Where you're like, and if you're not inclusive, you're evil and bad, right? The moralizing out group, right? So for like women who are growing up in like traditional homes that are Christian or something like that, or any religious home that's more like reserved around sexuality, when they go to university, this is something I absolutely experienced, of definitely being like shamed for my lack of openness to sexuality. And I wasn't shaming them, by the way, right? Like obviously, like if a religious person's coming in like, you're a dirty slut, like go buck wild on them, right? But like I'm just doing my life, and they're like, hey, do you want to like, we're like talking about our sex lives and stuff, and I'm like, oh yeah, I don't really do anything, right? And there's like this shaming of being like, well, like almost like you should, right? Like, why aren't you? What's wrong with you? And you should. And kind of this implication of like, you probably think we're really bad people for doing this. And like, even when I was a fundie, I just didn't give a fuck what people did, like with their bodies. I was just like, just don't harm people. Right. I did my best to stay in my lane. And so like, there's this paradox of inclusivity and positivity where it's like, are we encouraging unhealthy mindsets? Because any ideology forms a culture, and then the culture creates new norms. And yeah, you don't want a culture that's like shaming people who are like, yeah, I'm not comfortable with porn, or like asexuals. Like asexuals might feel kind of weird. I've talked to asexuals like, I don't know how I feel about all of this like aggressive sex positivity, because it like puts like this weird pressure of like, well, I don't really like that. And it feels like there isn't really a space for me in like maybe an online left space where I'm like not super interested in sexuality.
Yeah, I agree with the prude.
Nice. Yeah, I think in a perfect world, like sex positive would be, you're positive, you could choose what you want to do. So if someone tells you that, they're not into stuff, oh, that's great. Awesome. That's what you choose to do with your sex life. And then, sex negative would be essentially that, like shaming you for your sexual preferences. I think that's ridiculous.
Well, I guess going like piggybacking off of what others are saying here, even like the being open with your sexuality is also something that's like supposed to be sex positive, right? Like being open with like I guess your sex life and things like that. And I feel like there's too much pressure even on that front, right? Where it's like you're encouraged to be open and encouraged to be like super open about your personal life, right? And if you're not open about it, either you're a prude or you can't get any, or if you're I don't know, it just feels like there shouldn't be all this pressure to be like super open with your sex life, and just because you're not open with it doesn't mean that you're not like a sexual person, right? So
Yeah. Sorry, does anyone else want to go before?
I guess I could say, like, I didn't mean to just be like, the joke was definitely intended, but
I thought it was hilarious.
A little more. I probably should have said more, because
I thought it was pretty funny.
Being asexual, I do commonly find myself, because I did want to kind of expand on that a little bit. I do commonly find myself in a way kind of walled out of certain things, and sometimes even looked at like I might be judging people as well. And this is something I've talked about on other panels before. It was something that I brought up at a Kink at Pride panel a year ago as well. Is it just like there are so many spaces that feel like they're very sexually charged because of a lot of championing of sex positivity that create sort of a social wall for me, that I feel if I go through that wall, I become part of that in their expectations, and I don't want that. And so I don't go through that wall, and then people look at me like I'm judging them or something, and that's not the case at all. Sometimes I joke about it. It's something I even joked about. Even earlier today, I put out a tweet saying all kinks should be shamed equally. Like,
that was so funny. That was such a good tweet.
So it's something I joke about oftentimes, because I do see it and I do experience it, and I get the looks and stuff like that. So I kind of lean into it to exaggerate it and make it fun, as a way to sort of break the ice around it, so I don't get people looking at me that way so much. So
Yeah. I actually, now that I'm thinking about this, I'm also concerned that like rampant unfettered sex positivity has also led to like some of the weird dangerous situations that a lot of young people find themselves when they like first leave home. They're like 18 to 20, they're in university, and they're just being sex positive. So like lots and lots of casual sex. And it's like casual sex is fine. I have no moral feelings about casual sex at all, but there's an inherent increased risk with casual sex. And we don't have a great consent social landscape. We don't have a great sex landscape. Like it feels like what we did is we like got rid of like the puritanical, like oppressive religious view of sex in like the 90s to like early 2000s. And then like, just like it was like a classic trope, like just like every oppressed religious kid, when they like leave home, they just like bust out into like fucking everything all the time. And like, it goes too far, right? Where then they look back and they're like, holy shit, like I got into a lot of dangerous situations, right? I have multiple friends who did this and they got like actively like abused, right? Where they were in a casual sex encounter and getting like choked when they weren't comfortable with it. I've had friends that have been stealthed in these situations because they just like don't even know what stealthing is or that it could be a thing, right? People getting STIs as a result. And it's like in the unfettered sex positivity, there's like this lack of wisdom of being like, how do you do sex? How do you engage in it and be comfortable at it? And also like, you don't have to want to do that either, by the way. Like you can also decide that you don't want to do casual sex, and that doesn't make you a bad person, right? Because the dating landscape is kind of fucked up from this as well. Like there's an expectation that within 2 to 3 dates, if not the first date, that you're fucking. And it's like, that was a huge issue for me because I had like a lot of sexual trauma in the past that I was like, there's no way I'm going to be fucking somebody on the first date. Like I will freeze and it won't end well. Like it will be very bad for me, right? So that wasn't something I was comfortable with, and it really impacted my dating life to some extent, right? Like the reality is like I had to keep dating within like weird Christian circles and be like, man, I hope I can find a really open-minded Christian male who doesn't like want to fuck on the first night, right? So it like really limited my dating pool just because of this, right? And then I got called things like prude and stuff like that, which by the way, that was hilarious. I'm not saying that that's like some deep, painful wound, right? But like they were saying it in a derogatory way, right? And so like there is an issue with unfettered sex positivity, and I think like it feels like almost the same side of like the puritanicalness. It's just like the opposite side, but there's just dangers inherent with it too.
If I can piggyback off that point really quickly, I think that's such a great point, because one thing that I've noticed, like when we talk about Puritanism and stuff like that, I feel like I've experienced something similar where like when you feel objectified by being over-sexualized, right? It's a similar feeling to being forced into a very strict gender role because of like traditional upbringing. At least for me, it felt like the objectification is almost identical, is what it felt like for me. And one thing that I really don't like about this sex positivity as well is I think there is something there where like a lot of girls who wouldn't function well in casual sex relationships are feeling pressured to partake in them, and not everybody is well versed for those. And I wish when I was growing up and when I was younger that I didn't feel as pressured to partake in those things. I think I could have like saved myself from a lot of really bad situations, you know? And so I think that, and this is not saying that like nobody can do it. I think there are women who are very capable of engaging in casual sex and being okay. But it's really truly not for everybody, especially for like younger people who haven't learned how to stand up for themselves yet, who haven't learned how to advocate for themselves yet. It can be a pretty like dangerous situation if you don't know how to advocate for yourself. And like Natsu Erudite was saying, finding somebody to like date who's like one, like, you know, like not religious and stuff like that, and then also two, going to wait until you're ready to like to be with them is really hard. It's very hard. So
Haley?
Yeah, I think that and this happens, to bring it back to sex work, like this happens in sex work too. I think especially when OnlyFans blew up, especially in the pandemic, when people didn't have the same amount of income. it looked like this, glamorous thing. You make all this money, and it lured a lot of women into it. And there was actually like a smaller movement on Twitter not too long ago of like, hey, it's OnlyFans is it's not as glamorous and amazing as it seems, and especially because all of these like girls that were in high school are like waiting to turn 18 to like do this, because it seems like such there's a stigma that is like easy, right? It's a quick way to make money, and that's not always true. There's a lot of trauma around it, and you have to like I think with the sex positivity, like it could inspire women to go in the wrong direction when maybe they're not ready for that, or they might regret it, right? I think it's important, like we're saying the same with relationships, that like you know what can happen with that, what the downfalls are of it, and the possible trauma from it as well.
We have too many pragmatists on this panel.
Yeah, I think it's possible. Yeah, I'm gonna be essentious again. Like I don't have anything super wild to say, but like I think it's very possible we need to maybe like pump the brakes a little while we, because these movements, even like despite the 70s, still fairly new. We're still trying to figure this stuff out. Equality of the sexes and sex positivity and having more freedom with that, like more culturally accepted freedom. But I don't want to push them too hard because the alternative is a little scary to me, and I would rather, like when it comes to young women, focus on like making sure they know how to establish boundaries in general. Like just from like children should learn how to establish boundaries in general, because it ties so well into that and helps so much with that. I worry about both.
I think the worry is definitely like valid, because again, like I've said, like there's an equal feeling of objectification when you've been like even in like these highly Puritan kind of like subcultures, right? Like if you're being like kind of like forced into like a more like maternal or like traditional female role at an early age because of the traditions that you're brought up with, like to me that feels objectifying, right? It's just objectifying in like the opposite direction, but I feel objectified all the same because I'm essentialized due to my body, like my biological differences, right? And so I think like obviously there needs to be moderation with this, but I mean we've also got the issue with like, one, we've got like a bunch of people who are raised in like these bubbles where they get exposed to like this new like sexual freedom when they get to college. We've also got like just the fact that like culture is changing so rapidly around this, right? Because of like not just the sexual empowerment and all of that, but because of like we're changing the standards we have for men and women, right? We're changing how men and women like interact in the dating scene even. So like so we're still relearning the rules of what dating is. We're still relearning the rules of like what's appropriate for a man to do and what's not appropriate for a man to do, right? And a lot of women still haven't learned how to like communicate their boundaries. So we're going to run into issues where like somebody violates a boundary without even knowing it, and that's going to happen a lot. So a lot of issues here, not just for women but for men as well.
Yeah, and like I will do like some lifting. My understanding of sex positivity at like the ideological level, which I think we can all recognize isn't always how culturally these ideas play out, but at an ideological level, my understanding is it's like basically a movement of like trying to reduce shame around sex, and that people can express their sexuality in whatever way and be reduced from shame, and just like empowers people to make choices. And I think that that's like a valid idea. I know like most of their critiques come down to like, yeah, but functionally, like how does that actually play out? And like practically, like what is the culture that's being formed around it? And I think that that's fair. I think it's even fair for like people to be able to pose questions like saying like, like if sex positivity became like as as dogmatic as some ideas have become, you wouldn't be able to question it, right? Which I think right now it's not. Like, you can absolutely question sex positivity. I know lots of sex positive people. I would say I'm broadly mostly sex positive as well, right? And you can ask them, but like, we might be able to ask the question at some point, like, is there any sex that's like harmful, right? Like, I think everyone would agree, like, sex with minors is harmful, right? And is there anything beyond that that's harmful? Is too much porn maybe something that we shouldn't advocate for, because, like, you know, people develop real porn addictions, or porn can sometimes actually impact how well people can like orgasm when they're with like a real life partner, right? And so, like, I don't think that this is actually happening necessarily in the sex positive like thought bubble. I think culturally how it's playing out is like a lot of people are like, yeah, sex positive, and like any sex positive like educators like, no, like that's not fucking sex positivity at all, right? But yeah, I'd be curious for like, is there too much of certain sex things, and can we pose those questions still if like sex positivity becomes too strong in our culture?
It'd be interesting to hear some, like, because we seem to all relatively agree. It would be interesting to hear some like sex positivity champions and like their opinions kind of introduce their perspective into this, just to kind of, I don't know, get something to reflect on or bounce or contrast against.
Yeah. So
we need a doobie. We need a femme doobie to play devil's advocate for us.
No, I can do that though. So like I've argued.
I've been a fundy. I could steel man the opposing position as well.
Yeah. Like I've argued with Joe when she brought up this point. So like, yeah, I've been fighting her. I know her points because I've fought against her points. But I think that the sex positivity is a worthwhile movement or a worthwhile framework to work off of, because of a lot of things that you all have already said before, right? Because of the shame, because of the stigma. I think that the fact that people are feeling so liberated to express themselves sexually in all kinds of ways, like, is because of this movement, right? It may not all fall under this name, but it's the same mindset that we can talk about people who express their sexual desires in normative ways, or their non-sexual desire, right? And say like, that's cool, right? Do your thing, right? Like a sex positivity is, at least in my opinion, maybe other people feel differently, but sex positivity should also be like the free to not have sex, right? Like if you don't want to, if you don't want to engage it for whatever reason, then that's cool. If your idea of like a sexual relationship can only form because if you have that emotional attachment, as of some people, right? Like they literally just cannot have a sexual response until they have that emotional connection with that other person, then that's great, right? Like I don't shame you because you're not a red-blooded fucking American, right? Guy, and you're like immediately erect when you see boobs or something, you know? Like that's
mean 14-year-olds.
Exactly, right? Like that's sex positivity too, though. And so I think this movement, born from leftist spaces, is overall, I mean, like, I guess everything in moderation is the lesson there, but I push back when I feel people are like when I feel people are saying that this movement doesn't provide value, right? And that it is somehow undermining how like our relationships to one another, right? I think there are many things that can be said for like the breakdown of how people relate in terms of like the dating scene, right? And how that's changing and morphing now, and no one knows exactly how they should be interacting with it. And then there's a lot of pressure to conform, right? Before it was pressure not to put out, now there's pressure to put out, right? So like I think it's a moving target that we haven't quite figured out how to deal with. But I think sex positivity is the best framework that I have currently to solve these issues? What do you think?
Well,
Yeah,
for the record, I'm feeling a little pressured by Prime. I just want people to know that his sex positivity is making me feel a little like there's expectation.
I think the main critiques of sex positivity that I have heard has been, I'll try my best to steel man it because I don't even identify as a feminist, but it's from the feminist movement of basically arguing that like nothing happens in a vacuum, right? There's always intersectional things at play. And so to act like sex positivity is purely this positive thing erodes the fact of like, again, Chad, I'm steel manning, but it erodes the fact that like there's been this long historical patriarchy that's oppressed women and sexualized women aggressively. And a lot of sexual money and like the money in sex work is oftentimes still in some levels of certain like degrading sex work, right? Like sex positivity is all about like empowerment and stuff like that. But a lot of women in sex work end up having to do things that like they'll say, like if you listen to different sex workers, they'll be like, oh yeah, I've definitely done some stuff that I felt pretty degraded by. And then you're like, well, is that really sex positive or is that just like now like right? And so I think feminists have this issue of basically being like, is it really empowering for women to like, are they ever actually really like openly saying like, yes, I just want to be cum shot on my face. I really enjoy that. That's what I want to do like in my sex work, right? And they kind of pose this question of like, sure, maybe there are some women who actually genuinely really enjoy that and they're fully autonomously choosing that. But in reality, it's probably a somewhat pressured choice. And it often, a lot of these like sexual acts that they need to engage in for their sex work still puts women in positions of like, what's the word? Like submissiveness in like a submissive position still fundamentally. And so like, I think that's the main argument I've heard from the feminist end against sex positivity. Is that correct?
You're absolutely right. This is exactly what I have to tell Jill. And this is why I would love to have another debate with her one-on-one on this, because usually it's in a panel and other people are in my fucking way when I need to handle this. But no, that's exactly it, is what she says.
Okay.
And I guess my problem with that argument is that it puts some sort of special weight on this level of coercion, because again, capitalism, right? Like people do sex work for all kinds of reasons. Oftentimes it's survival, and that sucks, right? Like the best way to get rid of that is to have a better safety net so that no one has to do anything they don't really want to have to do, right? That they can focus on like going to a job or a career that they find meaningful, or at least just like not degrading, right? And those like specific actions you talked about, like, you know, cum shot, right? Like those things, there are some people who do find that degrading, and they should not be there. Have to do it, right? If they want to engage with sex work, they should be able to design their work in a way that is, you know, completely positive for them, right? Which to a certain extent OnlyFans have allowed them to do, right? To get themselves out of the studio system and then like take control of what they want to produce. So if they don't want that on their face, then it doesn't have to happen. So that's good. But like what I hear when I hear people like talking about like specific acts and like oh, this is actually quite degrading women, it's like, well, then you no matter who you are, don't get to speak for all women, right? All women have their own limits, right? And not just women, like everyone has their own limits within a bedroom. And some people like do find this empowering, right? I take their word for it. I'm not going to infantilize these women and say that like they're like they don't know what they're talking about, right? Like I know better for them, and that this actually is like lowering your self-worth. But I think the idea that even lowers people's self-worth is based again on these our previous religious ideas on how sex should be, that are still integrated into the fabric of society, right? And I don't want to place that on to someone else, right? If they say they're fine with it, that's good. If they feel like they're coerced to say they're fine with it, then that's bad. And I would like to create a space where they don't have to do that.
Yeah, to like those types of feminists, I would kind of want to know what their sort of alternative philosophy is that wouldn't hold women to like this sort of standard of sexually holding themselves back, just because those sexual ideas may be informed by like, you know, some cultural upbringing or like the pressures that they don't really have control over at the moment. I would want to know like what, because I've vaguely familiar with this. Probably more like the cultural sense of like, you know, seeing it on Reddit and stuff. But I haven't really seen anything other than basically a lot of people that already agree that these things are degrading and want to hold themselves back from doing a lot of sexual things that sex positivity does open themselves up to, kind of agreeing with it. And I don't know, like, what would a woman do?
I think again, I'm going to be steel manning. So like if this is somebody who's listening's position and I do a terrible job, I apologize. My understanding of like their contention with this would basically be like this idea of like new sexual positivity and flexibility and openness is actually just kind of a new form of sexism that we're just like making okay. But the reality is that like all the energy that's being invested into like normalizing sex is going still towards normalizing a sexist form of sex, when instead the energy should be put towards fully redefining what sexuality can look like for women. That would be their argument, I would guess.
I have definitely heard arguments like that before. And I think a lot of feminine sexuality is still sort of girded by, if that's the right word, girded by patriarchal norms that we've dealt with. And so it's a valid critique or a valid concern, is that girding needs to go, or those bounds need to go, and that's what needs to be shattered. Whereas a lot of the sex positivity just kind of plays on that existing framework, but allowing it to be just driven effectively, or at least appearing to be driven by women independently, but they're still going down the same path with the same barriers and walls that frame in feminine sexuality in a very patriarchal way. I can definitely see that, and I've heard people describe that and use that critique before, and I can definitely understand that was like the criticism of WAP, right? That was one of the common criticisms from feminists about WAP, was that specific critique. Mm-hmm. It's like, well, why are they leaning into this very masculine patriarchal definition of feminine sexuality? And I'm not even sure what to think about it, honestly, because again, I'm coming from such an outside perspective of someone who does not play into sexuality in any way, shape, or form. And again, I was socialized initially in the very early days of my life in a masculine way. So I come from that perspective originally, but then I'm asexual and I try to not show anything, and I don't lean into my sexuality in any way, shape, or form. So I come from this very outside perspective that's very hard for me to comment on that specifically.
Yeah, I mean, like, despite that, I would just I'm going to err towards the side that gives people the most autonomy. You can criticize like the way that people advertise their sexuality or the way that people talk about it if the way they talk about it is irresponsible, but a lot of the way that I've seen that argument be made is it seems to be another type of controlling women. They're just asking women to control themselves because they acknowledge that those sociological conditionings are in place, and those like incentives to bend to the patriarchy are in place.
Right. Yeah. So these feminists would basically be arguing that like, why are we encouraging like this sex positivity that actually just reinforces the patriarchal, like oppressive view? Like it's empowerment for everybody and oppression for everyone, right? Empowerment of a few and oppression for everyone, right? It normalizes these like unhealthy dynamics that we have between the genders that actually are problematic and oppressive for women. So why would we be encouraging this? Why wouldn't sex positivity be more so looking at dismantling what the patriarchal like box is for how women engage in sex overall?
I know you're
I'd say that's the feminism, not sex positivity. It's something that needs to happen simultaneously in my mind.
Erudite, I know you're critical of the idea of the patriarchy, right? At least in the way that leftists like express it.
Yeah. Just to be clear, I've been steel manning the whole time.
These
have not been my positions. Okay, no. I just want to make that clear.
I know. And so I know you are critical of how leftists express that, but it seems like, and maybe I'm wrong, maybe I missed something, but compared to what your actual opinions were that you were expressing previously, that this is very similar, right? That like, but for the idea that the patriarchy is imposing all this on us, that you kind of agree with that, like at least on the personal level.
I agree with the critiques that this feminist position would be levying.
Yeah, except for like the patriarchy part, right? And that like we're just like creating an over sexualized world. We're like creating basically a new type of sexism. We're forcing these things on people. Like, how does your opinion differ from this feminist argument? Basically?
Yeah. Basically, I would argue that like a lot of these traditional things that people find sexy aren't inherently oppressive. They seem to be more so in the nature of like how different genitalia actually works, right? And so the idea of like being entered, I would say, is inherently a little bit more submissive because somebody is fully invading your bodily space. But that doesn't mean that it's bad, right? It's just different. And so the idea that you can't be empowered while also occupying maybe more gender traditional sex acts doesn't seem to hold much weight to me, because the reality is that I think like we live in a post-patriarchal society, which means that if a woman chooses to adopt traditional gender roles, she's fully within her right to do so and can be empowered while doing that. The difference is that she's choosing it rather than being forced into it by a society, right? And so like if there's a lot of women who choose to basically do the trade-off of, I don't love cum shots, but man, I love money, right? I actually think that that's empowering too. They're just placing their priorities of their body underneath their desire for money, which I think people can actually do. And I don't really have an issue with that. And I don't want to moralize women at being like, but your body always comes first, when it's like, sometimes it doesn't, right? We sacrifice our bodies all the time for work, for money, for family, for love. And so the idea that like now just in the case of sexuality and sex work, we have to make sure that we're just fully empowered, right? We want a bunch of women with strap-ons just pegging men all the time. Like this idea that like receiving in some way is inherently disempowering. I don't know. I just have an issue with that because it's like, it's not oppressive to be entered. It's just a different experience. It's more invasive in a lot of ways, right? But we could actually like talk about how like there's a level of like beauty that comes with that as well, and like what kind of experience that is for women that we could like empower in a good way, rather than just saying traditional sex roles are bad. Like we can look at like what's the value in it and maybe what's bad. Like we can maybe be like, hey, cum shots aren't empowering, you know? I'm willing to maybe get on that board and be like, maybe we should do away with cum shots. But if a woman wants to make a shitload of money doing a bunch of cum shots to like a very niche audience, I don't know, go for it. I don't have an issue with that. And I think telling women that they're not being empowered because like they've been basically brainwashed by the deep airs of patriarchy just like really removes people's like actual like will to choose things, right? Like if they say that they're empowered, I'm going to give them the benefit of the doubt unless I see something different. And then if it's a friend, I might voice things. But like this idea of like, I should just put all my energy towards like toppling the patriarchy, I don't think it really exists anymore. I think we actually did it. We just have post-patriarchal issues that we need to tackle now. And sex positivity unquestionably is really needed in our society, in my view. Like I think we actually really do have, like as a former fundie who's come out and done really well, I still hold a lot of weird shame around my own sexuality, right? Like I've never really put that on other people. Luckily, I just kind of lucked out in the fundie land to not put that on other people, I guess. But I value sex positivity for that. I think we can be critical of it in certain areas, like shaming people for being prudes. But my understanding is like most sex positive advocates aren't doing that anyways. So yeah.
So in short, are you saying I'm hearing, let's fight for a pegging utopia?
Yeah. Oh yeah.
I'm imagining like extremist feminist erudite, right? Like her running for president, her platform, right? A strap on for every woman, right? A sore ass for every man.
There's just gonna be photos of me posing. Just a big strap on. Yeah. Front and back actually, so I can double peg at the same time. Get the full motion to be benefiting two people.
Be efficient. Yeah, that's right. I love it.
I sent a photo in the group chat that you guys should look at. You might have seen it on Twitter. It's like, this is what the libertarian. Yeah. This is what we want.
Put it up.
I've seen this one.
So good.
Oh, did I hear a doggy talking?
Yeah, my dog was singing because my husband came in and said that he's really into pegging, and my dog was like, based.
So I just want one more question. And this might be too long, right, for this conversation, right? And since we're near the end, but what do you mean, just like TLDR, What do you mean by post-patriarchal world? Because this might be something I want to fight you on at some point in time.
Sure. Yeah. I would say historically, beyond a shadow of a doubt, there's a patriarchy. There was an active system made by men to uphold men, like objectively. And I think questioning that, the historicity of that is not wise, in my opinion. The issue is that I actually think that we toppled that system, right? The active system made where like literally women couldn't be hired for positions, right? I think what we now have is this post-patriarchal. So there are going to be systemic issues as a result of the historicity, right? So there's going to be systems that, like, for example, women's work is not valued as much still. That would be to me a residue of a post-patriarchal society. So it's systemic in the fact that we like don't value these things, but it's not because we're actively trying to keep women down now. And I think that that's the difference. Is to me, patriarchy, there's a lot of intention that goes into it, based at least on the definition alone. Whereas now we have more of this cultural systemic issue of like kind of like the death throes of our history that we have to reconcile through. And therefore like the big bad enemy doesn't really exist other than being like, hey, there's these old systems that don't work as well anymore. And how do we change them to be a little bit more inclusive?
Do you mean this in mostly like a US context?
This would be in North America exclusively.
Okay.
Like I would say like
Okay.
if you're getting into like Saudi Arabia or other like countries, there's obviously still patriarchies going on.
Yeah. I would even say that in developing, like there are other countries like that are like developing but still have like patriarchal, you know. So yeah.
I would disagree. Yeah, I think I would disagree with you on the lack of intentionality for how things are in our current society. I think I can come up with plenty of examples when there's like pure intentionality there. But okay, that's like a longer thing. And we can fight about it. It'll be fun.
Sounds like it would be a long
That would be a fun
conversation.
Yeah.
For sure.
Yeah.
Okay. To my audience, we will continue on. We'll have a walk-on panel after this, so stop by, or not stop by. You'll be already here. Stay here, and we'll continue on with more content for you. All right. So stick around. We'd love to have you. Hit that follow button. If you haven't done so yet, hit that follow button. Make sure notifications are on so you know I'm going live. It is 7 nights a week, either here or on YouTube. So stick around. !social and chat. For our social media, we have Twitter where we tweet things. Thank you, Zonia. I'll thank you in a second. We have Twitter where we tweet things. Discord where we do everything. Heart and Soul community. Join us in our Discord community. We want you to be there. And then of course YouTube. That's where you'll find the VODs. If you missed anything, like, comment, and subscribe to help us out on YouTube. Consider becoming a member. Hitting that join button. It means a lot, does a lot, helps a lot. Okay. So we are going to give an outro to all these wonderful individuals. We'll start with Zonia, who like does something really kind, gives us 10 hot tier gift subs to the channel. Thank you so much, Zonia. Hey, that means a lot. It really does. It allows me to do this. I can't do it without kind people like Zonia assisting. So thank you, Zonia, for that and for coming through, being part of all this. This is a lot of fun, guys. Make a hype train. 2 more people donate. But like this was really fun having you around. Thank you, friend. I haven't seen you in such a long time. I was talking to Katie when I sent you that invite. I was like, oh, this is gonna be a long shot because I don't think Zonia hasn't been around. And so when you said yes enthusiastically, I was like, oh wow, all right, Zonia's back. So thank you for being here.
Yeah, you kind of lucked out because I went ahead and I accepted a panel slot on Fanatic's stream tomorrow, and I wasn't really. Oh yeah, that's right. Yeah, and I wasn't really thinking of doing any other panels, but then when you brought up this one today, I was just kind of like, yeah, sure, why not? So yeah, I've been kind of out of the panel scene. I've been taking a bit of a break and taking a step back from things and trying to detox and stuff, and failing miserably at that. But for this panel, this is a lot of fun. I feel I failed to hold frame with my far right MRA advocacy and such. I apologize for that. I feel I've disappointed my far right audience and my MRA audience. I apologize, but I had a lot of fun. This is great. It was great being on a panel with all of you, and Erudite and Kaylee. I believe this is my first time on a panel with both of you. So this was awesome doing that. Finally getting to hang out with you guys, and great hanging out with Cyrus and my friend Stardust again. And of course, Prime, great seeing you again. And of course, Prime's chat. Always love you guys. You guys are always a hoot. So shout out to chat. Love you guys as usual. And Yeah.
I love
Otherwise,
that you unironically say things like hoot. So that's great. That's
otherwise, yeah, Zonia Dead at Twitch, and I'm streaming right now. So if you guys want to hop on later, I'll probably still be on for a while. See you
link
guys.
is in chat. Please, everyone, go follow Zonia. And one more person, start that hype train. One more gifter. Thank you, Desperado Sensei, for the sub. One more person. Helps. Helps.
Come on,
time.
donate, guys. Give him something back for this wonderful content you got with a whole bunch of beautiful women talking to you about nothing other than sex. So, and sex positivity. Come on, fork it over. Make it rain.
Next, we'll go to Kaylee. Kaylee, who is like always in my chat, always like having a good time. Honestly, she like livens up the place all the time. So I'm like ecstatic when I can have her here, when I can talk to her face to face. Like Wick is lucky. Wick has her all the time on his channel, but it's rare for me to have her here. So thank you, Kaylee, for stopping by and helping out.
It's only because Katie asked me. If you asked me, I probably would have said no. No, I'm just kidding. Yeah, I had a lot of fun. I'm pretty tired. I apologize. I wasn't debating today. And honestly, some of the discussions I was really just like super interested in, and I learned a lot from you guys today. So thank you, everybody. I've talked to Cyrus before, definitely talked to Erudite, and I haven't talked to Stardust or Zanya. So that was really cool to speak to everybody. Yeah, and so I do a show with Wick on Tuesdays, 6 p.m. Eastern time. It's a call-in show, and it's just like pretty lighthearted. Unless you don't want it to be lighthearted, then you call in and we can talk about whatever you want. Sometimes we talk about politics and whatever's going on in people's lives. It's a really good time over there. And yeah, other than that, I don't really have anything to promote. But yeah, thanks for having me on.
Thank you. It means a lot. Seriously, Kaylee, like I really enjoy just having you in my community. It's just so kind that you could share some of your time with us. So thank you so much.
Thanks.
And thank you, SA, for the 100 bits. And then thank you, Proletariat Brewer, for gifting a sub as well. We're at level 2 hype train, 78% done, 22% left. Can we get to a level 3 hype train? Subs to channel, give bits, or give subs. Okay, back to this. We're going to go to Stardust next. Stardust, we know, I think everyone else already here knows that I love Stardust because I have her on all the time, right? Like every week that I can get her on, that I do have her on. Stardust has a whole lot of fun, and she has a really fun channel. Right, like go check it out. Like if you haven't done so already, I think everyone in my audience already has. And you're not really a fan if you haven't done so. So like go check out Stardust. You're going to enjoy like one of the most unique shows that we have here on Twitch Politics. So Stardust, thanks for being here and sharing your time.
Thank you for having me. I'm Stardust. I run a show called Chaos Cast every Saturday on Twitch, where it's more of like a comedy / social panel. Nasir Erudite was on it recently. And then on Sundays, I run a panel on YouTube called Supernova, where it's much more blood sportsy. Still semi-casual, but very blood sportsy. You may know that I've gotten into some controversy recently because of one of my Chaos Casts had the N-word dropped on it, and that was not fun. And then the other controversy is that one of my supernovas had Nick Fuentes, Ethan Ralph, and Flamenco duking it out on it. So that was fun. And then I'm getting canceled by everybody right now. So come check me out. I have YouTube and Twitch. I'm streaming. I switch between the two. I stream on Twitch earlier in the night, and then switch over to YouTube later at night. Just diversifying in case the hate mob comes for me. So we'll see what happens. Thanks, guys.
That's actually a really smart idea. I haven't considered that. Like just switching in the middle. Actually, really smart. I might actually start doing that. Wow.
Thanks.
Thank you, Stardust. That's a really good idea.
It definitely carries the audience over for you.
You mind if I link
part.
my YouTube in your chat? Since
Please post
please,
in the group DMs too, so I can share it.
Yeah, everywhere, guys. If you want to spam, I'm linking your Twitches, but you guys want to spam any other your socials in my chat, please do. And please, how about the hype train? Save the hype train. We're level 2 hype train, 78% done. Let's see if we can get to a level 3 hype train. We're almost there. Sub to channel, give bits, give subs. Help us out a ton. Cyrus, thank you for stopping by. I haven't seen you in quite a long time. And it was really a pleasure having you around. Thank you for joining us. Yeah.
Yeah, I really appreciate it. I still haven't gotten the hang of like consistent streaming. I actually really appreciate being invited on panels because at least it's like something I can hold myself to. And yeah, these are always like pretty chill. It's like the only Twitch panel I know of that's exclusively like ladies and non-binary hoes is what seems to be the case. So yeah, again, I really appreciate it. Just follow if you enjoyed what I had to say. Follow Stardust Twitter for the cancellation breakdown, and by that I mean the wild posting, the unhingedness.
Thanks for letting them know about that. I went full unhinged today on Twitter, so if you guys want to see somebody looking like a fucking lunatic, feel free to check that out. So
yes, absolutely. And we understood most of that through your robot voice. But thank you. So yeah. Next, last but certainly not least, we have Erudite. Erudite, you're so much fun. Oh my god. Like okay, I like hit Erudite up all the time to have her on because I know that when she comes on
for begging.
Begging. No, that works now. It makes more sense. But when she comes on, we have a ton of fun, right? Especially since we disagree, right? I won't stop saying it. She is the friendly face of the centrist enemy. But she always like puts out her points in such a very intelligent manner, right? That she tries to lull you away from the leftist paradise that we're trying to build here. So don't worry, I'll protect you all. But still,
we need more like her.
We do need more like her. She's a lot of fun. So thank you so much, Erudite, for being a part of this, for coming through, and for sharing your time, right? Because you can do other things with your time, but you're here with us, so thanks.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me. I have to vote. Kaylee, you have the cutest laugh on the panel, unquestionably. Zanya, like I said, I wish I was joking more about how hard I simp for you, but it's not really a joke. It's really aggressive, actually, the amount of love I have and like respect I have in my heart for you. I was like, I think I've talked about you to my husband like 5 or 6 times and we've never talked before. I just think like you really live your ethics and your values, and I really respect you for that. I think you're really cool.
Thank you.
Yeah. I know I'm not plugging myself. I'm just plugging everyone else, but thank you, Prime, as always, for having me.
She's not lying. She's not lying.
Yeah. Whenever we go to the gym, I'm like, have I told you about Zanya today? Yeah. I just think you're really cool. And of course, Prime, I love you. I think you're just great. I really like what you do, and even though you've got dog shit takes, I'm just kidding, only half. I think I just love being here, and I really appreciate how much you've supported my career so far. So yeah.
Thank you. All right. So we'll continue on for Open Walk On panel right after this. Anyone here can join us, but if not, that's okay. Thanks for spending your time, your energy, your knowledge, and your passion. My community, I know they appreciate just as much as I do. Have a good one. Bye.
Bye.